Welcome to this learning series about the citizen and the democracy by the Shalom Hartman Institute. I'm Masua Sagiv, and I'm going to discuss the duty to raise your voice as part of being a responsible citizen, or in other words, about social criticism, both as a Jewish idea and as a contemporary commandment. I want to start this session with a scene from the Midrash of Vaikra Rabbah about the people of Israel. The setting to this scene is a metaphor from Jeremiah, placing a principle of shared responsibility. Okay, just let me share my screen. So the Midrash starts, Chizkiyahu taught, it is said, Israel is a scattered sheep. The Midrash asks, why are Israel likened to a sheep? And it answers, just as with a lamb, when it is hurt on the head or on any other limb, all its limbs feel it. So is with Israel. If only one of them sins, all of them feel it. Now we are approaching our story. According to the Midrash, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai tells us the following story. This metaphor may be compared to the case of men on a ship, one of whom took a borer and began boring beneath his own place. His fellow travelers said to him, "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" And he says to them, "What does it matter to you? Am I not boring under my own place? Mind your own business, right? I'm only drilling under my own place, so stay out of it." And they say, because the water will come up and flood the ship for all of us. They are telling him, your actions have consequences for all of us, not only you. You'll drown us all. So this is a famous story. I even have a version of it for kids, as a kid's story at home. And commentators have taken this midrash to talk about solidarity among the people of Israel. What does this solidarity entails? So the Bavli in Shvuot, also a very known phrase, the Talmud says, Kol Israel arevim ze bazeh. All of Israel are responsible for one another. So the Gemara is trying to explain the expression from Leviticus, and they shall stumble one upon another, which is part of the curses that will befall on the people of Israel if they don't follow the path of the Torah. And the Gemara explains that the sins of one stumbles his friend, or in the Talmud's language, and they shall stumble one upon another. That is to say, one because of the iniquity of the other. And this teaches us that all of Israel are responsible for one another. So the phrase responsibility here is borrowed from the legal domain to the moral religious domain. Under the legal domain, this responsibility is called a suretiship, which is the contractual relationship in which a surety engages to answer for the debt or default of a principal to a third party. Meaning, if I'm someone's surety, I'm responsible for his debt, or in our case, his sin. What's important here is that the responsibility here is not abstract, but one that demands me to stand in my fellow's place. It is as if we are mixed together. So really applying moral responsibility or solidarity at the national level means imposing collective responsibility because of individuals' sins. Translated to our times, I can think of several examples. When Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was murdered, for a while, every yarmulke-wearing person in Israel, every national Zionist, was feeling blamed for the murder. Every one of them were feeling as if they were suspects, as if the whole population is blaming them. Let's think of another example. When intense times, security-wise in Israel, when I was abroad or talking with non-Israeli acquaintances, I oftentimes was held responsible for my country's policy, regardless of my personal opinions. And I'm sure that's not only Israelis' experiences. Jews in America are often blamed for Israel's policy regardless of their supporting it or even, I don't know, even visiting it. So why is that? How can we understand this extreme mutual responsibility, this heavy blame laid on persons just by virtue of their nationality or belonging to a group? And what can we learn and take from this phenomenon for our experience as citizens in a democracy? The Midrash from Vaikra Rabbah gives us two possible explanations. The first is Chizkiah's metaphor of a living being, a metaphor that is known today as the organic perception of nationality. So according to this perception, the people is like a living creature. And when this creature hurts in one limb, all of the body is hurting. You know, in Israel, we have a song which says, "Kulam rikma enoshit achat gdola." Everyone is part of this huge human tissue, and really it entails the spirit of this metaphor, of this perception of nationality. The second possibility is the ship parable, where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai explains the national solidarity by a shared reality of the people. So this shared reality causes a situation where every action of one member of the people affects everyone. And so instantaneously responsibility or solidarity is created. And if that's the case, then one person's actions affects all of his fellows. This situation, from a modern, individualistic, liberal, and contemporary viewpoint, it can be extremely discouraging because no matter how I am acting, I can be the best person. But if my fellow citizen or citizens commit harm, I'm to blame. How is that just? So for me, the answer lies in the ship parable. But as opposed to most readers of it who focus on the image of solidarity and shared destiny and experience, I'd like to turn the spotlight on the fellow travelers of our whole driller, the ones that asked him, what is he doing? And told him that he endangered all of them. Because for me, the only way to understand the heavy responsibility, the shared responsibility that lies on each and every one of us is if we have the power or influence, if we have the power to influence this shared destiny, to do something to change the course society takes. And for me, this is not only about giving meaning and sense to this situation of shared destiny, but also a duty as a member of society, an obligation to speak up and raise my voice against those in society who are, in my eyes, drilling a hole in our society. And this is not an easy task. Think about how difficult it is to tell colleagues at work or people on the line to the restaurant to please wear a mask, sometimes several times a day. Think about telling your Israeli friends or family that Israel's actions are causing harm, infringing upon fundamental Jewish values. Everything is so partisan these days that not only those criticism from the other political side is intolerable, but even criticism that comes from one's own camp is deemed a betrayal. We see it in Israel when right-winged Israelis call for the resignation of Prime Minister Netanyahu. And we see it in the US when Republicans criticize President Trump. Now, I have to say, it's so much easier to criticize externally from outside. We could just say, hey, look, he's drilling a hole in their ship. What kind of society can morally stand someone's drilling a hole in their ship? And they're not telling him loud enough he should stop. Why aren't they arresting him? No, it's much tougher to stand in the same ship as the one you think is harming not only himself, but all of us, and stand up and raise your voice, saying you are endangering all of us with your actions, and you must stop. Now, the question is, of course, how do you tell your fellow traveler that she's drilling a hole in your shared ship? Because what we see in our societies these days is not healthy and constructive discourse. It's either people shouting and hurling insults and slogans and stigmas at the other side, or lowering their heads and keeping silent exactly because of this destructive dynamic in society. And the question is, how can we overcome this race to the bottom and move forward towards a true solidarity and a healthier society? So let's talk about social criticism. In most of the 20th century, when people thought about social criticism, they had in mind an image of a lonely, external, and disconnected social critic. Think of Jean-Paul Sartre. And according to this position, the critic must be distant from the social situation, both emotionally and intellectually, and rely on universal principles so that his voice and vision be pure. It's the people on the aircraft carrier that's sailing close to our ship, the ones who pointed their fingers and talked not only about the hole driller, but also about our reaction to his actions. We see this image also in the writing of Edward Said. He portrays an exiled, oppositionist, and lone social critic. According to Said, a sense of loyalty to society is the greatest threat to criticism. And as opposed to these notions, the political philosopher Michael Walzer is talking about connected social criticism. He argued that criticism should be made internally by men and women who are committed to the society whose norms they criticize, people who care about its future. For them, ours is not some random ship, it is our ship. Walzer felt that criticism as a social practice was not possible in the absence of loyalty or an affirmative sense of intimate connection with the criticized society or its members. This is the model the prophets of ancient Israel invented and presented to us, though not of their own critical message, but God's. And the prophets' messages were usually not pleasant to hear. And more often than not, people did not do what the prophets urged them to do. Nonetheless, people did listen to them. And clearly, they remembered their messages, right? We are reading in them each year until now. Why is that? Why did the people listen to the prophets? One explanation Walzer gives us is the nature of the message. The prophetic message always depends upon previous messages. It isn't something radically new. They continually refer themselves to the epic history and the moral teachings of the Torah. What they actually do is remind the people what they believe but have forgotten or turned against, showing them their own hearts. Another explanation to why people listened and remembered the prophets is the prophets' connectedness. We just talked about that. The concern of the prophets is for their people, the family that came up out of Egypt. They avoid sectarianism as well as larger universalism. And when they address their audience, they always use inclusive names, Israel, Joseph, Jacob. Their focus is always on the fate of the covenanted community as a whole, and they are rooted in their own societies. The prophets, they challenged the leaders, the conventions, the ritual practices of a particular society, and they did so in the name of values recognized and shared by that same society. So in its core, the connectedness and loyalty to society and its values are the cornerstones for the proper way to conduct social criticism. Walzer teaches us that being part of society enables our criticism. Because we know society's language, will know which values to use much better than someone outside of society talking about an abstract principle society might not share or even agree upon. Connected criticism is motivated by a deep sense of belonging to the group or the culture one criticizes. And that's also why it's more effective. So in order to manage to both speak up and cure the toxic discourse in society, we must choose our words carefully. We have to bear in mind in our criticism that we are indeed together in the same boat. And it's challenging because we need not only to save the boat from drowning, but to still be able to keep sailing together with our hole drillers. And you know what? Some of these people think that we are the hole drillers. So that's tricky and challenging. So Chizkiah and Jeremiah and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the parable demonstrate the situation in our national democracies in which solidarity in the sense of shared responsibility is not really a choice, but a given. But the parable goes one step further and illustrates how to still have influence on our situation. And that's by speaking up, by applying connected social criticism. So for me, the Midrash should be read not only as describing the importance of solidarity, but also prescribing our duties in society in order to achieve true solidarity. Now, I must emphasize something here. We often hear voices claiming that for the unity of our society, we must keep silent in the fear of offending or alienating our fellow citizens. But the Midrash teaches us that we mustn't confuse solidarity, social cohesion, good citizenship with staying silent. Solidarity and good citizenship are not achieved by ignoring and silencing disagreements. The ability to say to my fellow citizen, whom I care deeply about, I think you're doing something wrong for us as a society. That's something that we can build true solidarity on. Because true solidarity is not an empty agreement on unity. It's also not created only due to the shared experience and situation in our national democracy. No, true solidarity is the reflection and result of a public debate regarding our shared values and policy, where all voices are heard, the criticism is connected, and the discourse constructive. That's our obligation as citizens, and that's the only way, I think, to bring about a sustainable, healthy, and solidary society. Thank you for listening to this session, and have a good day.